The night my son-in-law's family drove away and left my daughter on the side of a Montana highway, the temperature was dropping towards zero, and I had exactly 11 minutes before the last of the daylight disappeared behind the mountains. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this story. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years working the line at a paper mill in Billings. I coached Little League for 12 seasons. I have never in my life considered myself a dangerous man. But that night, standing on my front porch watching the taillights of a black Escalade disappear into the dark, I felt something shift inside me that has never fully shifted back. My daughter's name is Claire. She is 34 years old, and she has her mother's eyes and her mother's stubbornness and, God help her mother's tendency to believe the best in people long after the evidence has gone the other direction. Her mother passed 8 years ago. Breast cancer. It was the kind of loss that doesn't leave a clean scar. It just stays open. Claire was 26 when we buried her mother, and I watched something harden in her after that, something that I think made her hold on too tight to the next person who offered her warmth. That person was my son-in-law, whose name was Derek. Derek Whitmore came from what people in this part of Montana call old ranch money. His family had been running cattle on a few thousand acres outside of Hardin for 3 generations. And they wore that history the way some people wear a fur coat in July conspicuously. And to make sure you noticed. His father, Wallace Whitmore, was the kind of man who shook your hand and looked just past your shoulder the entire time, as though he were already scanning the room for someone more useful. His mother, Lorraine, was perfectly pleasant in the specific way that very cold water is perfectly clear. His brother, Todd, had never held a job that didn't come with his last name attached. Claire met Derek at a fundraiser for the county hospital where she worked as an occupational therapist. He was charming. He was handsome. He laughed at the right moments and asked questions about her work with what appeared to be genuine interest. I met him 3 months into their relationship, and I will be honest with you, I liked him. I am not proud of that now, but I liked him. We talked about baseball for 2 hours at my kitchen table, and he helped me carry in firewood without being asked. I thought, this is a good man. They were married the following spring. The first year was fine. The second year, Claire started calling me a little less often. By the third year, she had stopped mentioning Derek in our conversations almost entirely. The way you stop mentioning a toothache because talking about it only makes it worse. I noticed. I didn't push. I have made many mistakes as a father. And one of them was confusing patience with permission waiting to be invited into a problem that was already past the point of being solved quietly. What I learned later, pieced together from Claire's therapist, and from court documents, and from my own daughter's voice shaking on my couch, was this. Derek's family had never considered Claire good enough. Not her job, not her background, not the fact that her father worked a mill and her mother had shopped at discount grocery stores. They were not cruel about it in ways that would show on camera. They were precise about it. Comments about her cooking at family dinners. Questions about whether she was really cut out for ranch life. Wallace once told Derek, within Claire's hearing, that a woman should know what she was marrying into before she started changing things. Derek, to his shame, said nothing. By year 4, what had been cold had become something else. Derek started leaving for days at a time without clear explanations. Money from their joint account moved in ways Claire couldn't track. When she asked questions, Derek would go quiet in a way that felt louder than shouting. She told me she felt like she was living inside a house where the walls were slowly moving inward. So slowly that some mornings she'd wake up and wonder if she was imagining it. She wasn't imagining it. The weekend everything broke open. Claire and Derek had gone to the Whitmore Ranch for what was described to her as a family birthday celebration for Wallace. I wasn't invited. I never was to these things. She called me from the road on the way out. Sounded tired, but okay. Said she'd call me Sunday night. I told her I loved her. She said she loved me too. I went back to watching the game. Sunday afternoon, I got a call from Derek's cell phone. Not from Claire. From Derek. He told me, in a voice that had the specific flatness of someone who had rehearsed the words and was committed to them, that he and Claire had decided to take some space. He said she had been difficult on the trip. He said she was not in a good place. He said it might be better if she came to stay with me for a while. Before I could ask what any of that meant, he said Claire would be in touch and hung up. I called Claire's phone 11 times. It went to voicemail. I was already putting on my jacket when my front door opened and Claire walked in. I want to describe what she looked like, because I need you to understand what I am telling you. She was wearing a light sweater and jeans. It was 41 degrees outside. She had no coat. She had no bag. She had a shallow cut along her left forearm that she would later tell me came from a fence post when Derek's brother Todd grabbed her arm and she pulled away. Her lips were not quite right. Her hands were shaking in the specific way. Hands shake when a person has been cold and also terrified and is trying very hard to hold themselves together in front of someone they love. She had been in their vehicle, Derek's father's Escalade, with Derek, Todd, and Wallace on the highway 7 miles from my house. According to what Claire told me, she had asked Derek to stop the car. There had been an argument that started at the ranch and continued for 2 hours. She had said she wanted out of the car, and Wallace had said, from the driver's seat, something like, "Fine, then," and they had stopped the car, and they had let her out, and they had driven away. 7 miles, 41 degrees, no coat. She had walked for over an hour before a retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Patricia Dunbar, who was driving back from her sister's house in Columbus, had stopped and asked if she needed a ride. Claire had given her my address. I held my daughter for a long time. I did not say anything. When she stopped shaking, I got her into dry socks and made her tea, and put a blanket around her and sat across from her at the kitchen table. And then I called 911. I want to be very clear about this, because I think it matters. I called the police first, before anything else. I reported what had happened. I gave the officer Claire's statement right there at the table. I told them where the Whitmore Ranch was. The officer I spoke to, a young man named Deputy Reyes, was thorough and professional and took everything down. He told me he'd follow up. After that call, I sat for a moment with my hands flat on the table, looking at the grain of the wood. Claire was watching me. She knew me well enough to know that I was not finished. I picked up the phone and I called my son-in-law's sister. Her name is Margaret, and she has been estranged from the Whitmore family for going on 9 years. She was the one who first told me, years ago when Claire and Derek were engaged, that the Whitmore men had a way of making women feel small. I had filed that away. I shouldn't have filed it away. I should have put it on the wall in large letters. Margaret works as a private investigator in Missoula. She has been doing it for 15 years. Before that, she spent 6 years as an investigator for the Montana Department of Justice. She left both the family and the state, partly because of what she knew about her father and brother and their way of doing business. When I told her what happened, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I've been waiting for this call. What happened next took 4 months. I am going to try to explain it without losing the thread, because there is a lot of it, and some of it is complicated, and some of it is the kind of thing that made me sit at my kitchen table at 2 in the morning unable to sleep." Margaret didn't come after the Whitmore family for abandoning Claire on the highway, though that was serious enough. What she did was start pulling on a thread that had been loose for years, a thread she had noticed when she still lived in Hardin before she understood what it meant. Wallace Whitmore had a business partner named Gerald Oates. They had run a cattle brokerage together starting in the early 90s, buying and selling livestock across 3 states. In 2009, Gerald Oates died in what was ruled a single-vehicle accident on Route 212. His truck went off an embankment on a road he had driven 1,000 times. His wife collected a life insurance payout. His son, a man named Kevin Oates who now lived in Billings and worked in auto parts, had always believed his father's death was not an accident. He had never been able to prove it. He had gone to the sheriff's office in 2011 and been turned away. He had hired a lawyer in 2013 and run out of money. He had, by the time Margaret found him, mostly given up. What Margaret found through financial records, through interviews, through a document that Gerald Oates' widow had kept in a shoebox for 14 years because she didn't know what it was, but couldn't bring herself to throw it away, was a paper trail that suggested Wallace Whitmore had been systematically defrauding the brokerage for 3 years. Before Gerald's death, moving money into accounts that only Wallace controlled, and that Gerald had discovered it approximately 6 weeks before he died on Route 212. She brought everything to the FBI field office in Billings on a Thursday afternoon in late October. I did not know the full scope of what Margaret was doing during those 4 months. She told me she was working on some things. She called me occasionally with questions. Did Claire remember specific conversations about money? Did Derek ever mention his father's business dealings? I relayed what I could. Claire cooperated fully. I think the process of cooperating gave Claire something to hold on to during a time when she was otherwise trying to figure out how to reassemble a life that had been quietly disassembled over 4 years. The divorce proceedings had begun within 2 weeks of that night. Derek's attorney was expensive and confident. Derek initially contested the terms and made noises about Claire being unstable. Those noises stopped when Deputy Reyes' report entered the record. And they stopped completely when Claire's attorney, a woman named Susan Park, who had the demeanor of someone who had heard everything and been impressed by none of it, subpoenaed Derek's financial records and found that he had been drawing money from their joint account and transferring it to a personal account for 22 months. Claire got the house they had owned in Billings. She got a settlement that I am not going to discuss in detail because it is Claire's business, but which was sufficient. She got her life back, which sounds like a small thing until you understand what it costs to lose it. The morning the FBI executed search warrants on the Whitmore Ranch and on Wallace Whitmore's business offices in Hardin, I was sitting on my porch with a cup of coffee watching the sun come up over the Beartooth foothills. Margaret had told me it was going to happen, not when exactly. I found out when Claire texted me a news link at 6:47 in the morning. I read the article once. I set the phone face down on the porch rail. I sat there for a while listening to the birds. Wallace Whitmore was indicted on 6 counts of wire fraud and 2 counts related to the financial circumstances surrounding his business partner's death. The investigation into Gerald Oates's accident was reopened. I will not tell you how that has concluded because it has not yet concluded, and I think Kevin Oates deserves to see it through before anyone else narrates the ending. Derek was not charged criminally. I want to be honest about that. What he did to Claire, the slow erosion, the financial control, the night on the highway, those things were documented, and they cost him significantly in the divorce, but they did not result in criminal charges. There are gaps in the law that people like Derek fall through. I do not find that satisfying. I do not think Claire does either. But she told me once, about 6 months after everything was settled, that she had stopped waiting for a verdict on Derek and started paying attention to her own life again, and that this felt better than she expected it to. She has her own apartment now in Billings, close to the hospital where she works. She got a dog. I have met Biscuit several times. I think he may be right. Todd Whitmore, Derek's brother, the one who grabbed Claire's arm at the fence, was named in a civil complaint that Claire's attorney filed. He reached a settlement in March. I was not in the room when the settlement was signed, but Susan Park told me afterward that Todd's expression when he wrote the check had been, in her words, very instructive. Lorraine Whitmore, Derek's mother, has not spoken publicly. She was not charged with anything. I think about her sometimes. I think about what it costs a person to watch a family be built on the wrong foundations and say nothing for decades, because the saying would have required a kind of courage that is harder than it looks from the outside. I don't know what to do with that thought. I just keep having it. Margaret came to visit in November, after the indictments. We sat at the same kitchen table where I had sat with Claire on that Sunday night. And I made pasta because it is one of the 4 things I cook well. And we talked for most of the evening. I thanked her. She waved it off in the way people do when they don't want to make the thing about themselves because making it about themselves would require them to feel something they're not quite ready for. Before she left, she stood in the doorway and said, "You know, I left that family because I couldn't stop what they were. I always wondered if leaving was the wrong call." I told her I thought she had stayed exactly long enough to know what to look for. She thought about that for a second. Then she nodded and walked to her car. Claire calls me every Sunday now. We talk for an hour, sometimes more. She tells me about her patients, about Biscuit, about a ceramics class she started taking on Wednesday evenings. She sounds, and I mean this in the most specific and precise way I know how to say it, like herself. Not the version of herself that spent 4 years shrinking to fit inside someone else's idea of who she should be. Herself. I am 63 years old. I work part-time now, consulting for the mill on safety compliance. I watch a lot of baseball. I split firewood in the fall because I find it useful and because the rhythm of it clears my head. I live in the same house I have lived in for 31 years. The house where I raised my daughter. The house where my wife's garden still comes up every spring, without any help from me, which I take as a kind of stubbornness I recognize and appreciate. On the porch rail where I set my phone that morning in October, there is a faint ring from my coffee cup that I have never sanded out. I see it every morning. I don't mind it. Some marks. You keep.